Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on COVID-19 response and recovery, the Global Transport Knowledge Partnership. This webinar is marking as well the launch of the newly and updated gTKP, the Global Transport Knowledge Partnership. Next slide, please. My name is Susana Zamataro. I'm the Director General of the International Road Federation. I'll be also the moderator of this session today. Next slide, Meline. Let me run you quickly through the agenda we have for the next 60 minutes or a little bit less now. We will start, of course, with some welcome and introductions. Then we will listen to two very interesting presentations that will be setting the stage, one from Bernard Obika and the second one from Holger Daltman. A very short panel as well to exchange and get the views of different stakeholders from our sector on what knowledge and for who. And in the final part of this webinar, I will introduce you the gTKP, where we started, how we have been working over the past month, what are we delivering today, and where we wish to go going forward. And we'll make sure to save a little bit of time for questions and answers in the end. On that, I'd like to tell you as well a couple of housekeeping rules. Please make sure if you have questions that you place them in the question and answer section that you see in my screen. It's at the bottom, first tab on the right, Q&A, question and answers. Use the chat if you want to comment or introduce yourself, but if you have a question, make sure you place it on the question and answers. I have some IRF team, Julia in particular, she will be keeping an eye on the questions and answers going forward. Let me introduce you the speakers, by the way. Next slide, please, Meline. We have today with us Bernard Obika, is the team leader of the High Volume Transport Program, HVT. Next one, I give my welcome as well to Holger Daltman, CEO and founder of Sustain 2030. And then next, I'd like to give the floor to introduce to you our panel. Unfortunately, Divine has had a last minute a problem that has hampered his participation today. He sends his most sincere greetings and regards, and we will have a chance later on to catch up with him at one of the next webinars, and I will tell you about this later on when we talk about the future of gTKP and the next plans. I'd like to welcome as well Patrick Kinyanjui, Program Manager, the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Alana Dave, Urban Transport Director at the International Transport Workers Federation. Without further ado, I think I will immediately pass the floor to Bernard to give us an introduction on the High Volume Transport Program and a couple of the priorities that HVT has. Meline, let's give the floor to Bernard. Thank you very much. Bernard, you are muted.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Just bear with me for a couple of minutes while I get my...
And in the meantime, 1 second to thank very warmly all the speakers for joining us today. We are all living and working around the clock these days, so I particularly appreciate them, the effort that they have made to be with us today. Bernard, you are not on full slide.
Okay, if I can just say that again.
And welcome and thank you so much to all the participants. I see the number, the counter growing as we are speaking.
Am I on full screen now?
Yes, you're on full screen and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. my pleasure to be here today with you, IRF, and with everybody else who's attending this meeting. As Susanna says, my name is Bernard Obika. I'm the team leader for the High Volume Transport Program. My presentation is in two parts. The first part, I'll tell you a little bit about the High Volume Transport Program, Applied Research Program. And then the second part, I'll tell you about a specific work that we've been doing around the COVID response and recovery program, of which the gTKP work that Susanna and her team has been doing is part of. So the High Volume Transport Applied Research Program is a 5-year program that is funded by the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office of the UK under UK aid. The program is essentially to look at some of the existing gaps we'll see around transport infrastructure in many low-income countries. We know that transport is responsible for over 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's also responsible for an estimated 50,000 people who suffer from severe pollution on a yearly basis. But we also know that transport is pivotal to our existence in the sense that it makes communities thrive, brings entrepreneurs access to schools, hospitals, and so on. So the paradox is, how can we tackle those issues around transport and make it better for everyone? We need to invest in transport, and yet we need to invest it in a way that it is friendly, climate friendly, and that it's sustainable. So HVT exists to try to address some of those questions. In part one of the program, we undertook a fairly extensive state of knowledge review in which we delved into transport issues around urban transport, long distance transport, low carbon transport, and inclusive transport under those 4 themes with regards to, of course, low income countries, which is our focus. If I can. So from those 4 initial studies that we did in terms of the state of knowledge reviews, we landed on essentially 5 priority areas. That is climate change mitigation and adaptation, inclusion, gender and road safety, policy regulation, including engineering aspects of those, technology, innovation, including data, the important areas of data, and of course, decision support systems. For our own priorities, we consider it really important that we did touch on fragile and conflict affected states because they're far behind everyone else under the overall UK number of Leave Nobody Behind and SDGs convention. And of course, cutting across those 5 priority areas is the research uptake and capacity building elements. So we currently have about 15 major projects running, cutting across those 6 priority areas. The way we framed our research was to allow research suppliers to co-create the specific research with us. We provided the framework around the priority areas and they created it. It just so happens that many researchers pivoted towards working in Africa, and many of our projects are indeed focused on Africa. We are in the process of redressing that by asking for specific design a specific program around South Asia, low-income countries of South Asia. Now, so that was about the high volume transport program. I'd like to perhaps focus more on the COVID response and recovery innovation program that we started about 7 months ago at the height of the first round of the pandemic. And I just show there on the screen a cutting from a newspaper from Tanzania, The Guardian in Tanzania yesterday, which suggests that only 4% of the COVID research is relevant to Africa. And that is quite interesting. That was in the newspapers in Tanzania yesterday. But it really underpins what we at HVT embarked on and saw as the gap and the need to provide urgent information to the low-income countries who are in danger of being left behind in the whole ecosystem of information around the COVID issue. So we started off by, we suggested areas of possible intervention, but pretty much left it to the many organizations, research organizations, academics, individuals in many low-income countries to suggest ideas of areas where we needed to plug the gap in terms of our knowledge and understanding of the pandemic and the issues, both in terms of how we respond to it immediately, and also in the medium to long term, how we make sure that we're on a good recovery path and the lessons learned are captured. So we received up to 200, nearly 200, what I would call evidence of demand in terms of research proposals. So 200 is the number we received. 21 is the number of projects that we ended up funding. And of those 21, there were 4 key categories which they all fell into, which I'll come to in a second. And so far, I believe 4 has been completed and published, and we anticipate that more will be completed in the forthcoming months. There were approximately 22 operated in lakes and Africa, and they're carried across both Asia and Africa on equal measures. So the first category, perhaps I'll illustrate the outcomes of this by looking at a specific example, which it's around the paper that was produced by Gail Jennings that looked at how did the whole pandemic system affect women. And the key findings pivoted around the fact that throughout the pandemic, women were more likely to have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and were some of the many disadvantages and inequities that we saw that prevailed before the pandemic were exacerbated and deepened during the period of the pandemic as a result of the pandemic. So there was a real inequitable, a disproportionate impact on women as a whole. And the research that's been brought out by this particular study exemplified that and demonstrated how that has occurred. And that's one example of the 6 or 7 research work that fall into this particular category. Another example of which we had about 8 research projects was on resilience and sustainability and active transport. And there are quite, I won't go into details and so on, but there are some of the early findings that we're having is that there are quite distinct differences between the perceptions around active transport that we witness in high-income countries to that which we witnessed in low-income countries, and what that means for the downstream transport policies in terms of building back better, and how that relates to the actions that we need to take around the greenhouse gas emission, for example, on electric vehicle transitions. Another set of bucket, if you like, of projects was around the issue of finance. Whereas in many high-income countries, we are fairly familiar with some of the regulatory issues and that is required around the pandemic to adjust the public transport regulation regimes. For example, there was the dangers around regulation of the public transport system, so that, for example, that transport authorities had to take fairly drastic measures to avoid, for example, being sued for infection in the transport systems, and all the financial risks and regulatory risks around those are fairly well covered. You will note for many high-income countries, many regulations and laws have been changed to cope with various aspects of procurement and all of those issues that relate to both procurement and transport systems and so on, are just not catered for in many low-income countries. So this particular study looked at the issue around the regulatory regimes around 11 low-income country places, and focused more importantly on Ghana to highlight some specific examples where the public transport systems were really exposed to various legal and financial issues. And the final bucket is really around knowledge dissemination and platforms. It became quite clear as the pandemic went through that where there were questions being asked by transport authorities, where do I go for the authoritative guide or information on what to do? How do we disinfect the transport systems? How do we, what are the real issues around transport that we need to be aware of with regards to the pandemic and so on? So quite a few fell into that category, and work is being done. And that is particularly where this particular intervention or work with IRF fell into, in that knowledge sharing platform. And indeed, we see, we anticipate many of these will be published in the not too distant future. These are short-term projects. We were conscious that we needed to get the results out within a fairly short period of time, and so on. So for us at High Volume Transport, the work that IRF is doing and within the gTKP, it's really important. Within our sort of our larger cycle of evaluating research, identifying research need, conducting research, is the application of the knowledge and the evidence that we gather, for which the platform we feel is fairly fundamental. Wouldn't it be nice to, at some distance in the future, that the transport sector would have its own authoritative voice in the way the health sector has in WHO and so on? At the moment, we feel there's a real important gap to be filled in having that central authoritative voice for the transport sector, and indeed might help us make a better impact when the next round of SDGs come along. So with that, I'd like to perhaps hand over to Susanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And let me also adjust my settings so I can see everyone. The clock is ticking, so I'd like to pass the floor immediately to Holger to keep setting the stage of the conversation for us. And while Holger puts up his presentation, I'd like to say a few things. We had an issue with the chat, which has now been fixed, so you can use your chat to comment, but use the question and answer function if you want to ask a question to any of the speakers and panelists today. Holger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. Can you see my screen?
Yes, very well.
Wonderful. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. First, there's a big thanks to IF and specifically Susanna for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak. And already congrats to the launches of the gTKP, and I had the pleasure as a senior advisor for the High Volume Transport Program to work with Susanna to support the launches today. But the reason I'm speaking today, I was asked to set a little bit the scenes in terms of looking back, taking stock what the international transport community had been done in the last year, and what needs to be also done for collective action towards sustainable transport, particularly with a focus on low-income countries. I had the opportunity to work with the HVT team also to publish 2 reports in April and in June last year, it seems ages ago, where we looked particularly into the activities from the international community, looking into the action as well as identifying also the gaps, and came up also with some recommendations where also the community also should also be more active. And you will see also that many familiar institutions here on the left side were analyzed in terms of the information, the guidance was provided, and so on and so forth. And you will find also these papers on also the HVT website. What I'd like to do today is taking stock. It doesn't make any sense also still to present the papers, but also looking into the recommendation and what happened so far. So the first of the 3 key recommendations was the need also for creation of low-income country information. So first, really also that we need also far more collecting and sharing information, particularly also, on low-income countries. And one example is COVID Mobility Works, where an alliance letters by the World Economic Forum with partners like the World Resources Institute, Polis, TNO, and others, with collecting city case studies, so what cities have done, and HVT is a partner with them, particularly to provide also case studies also from lower income countries. Second, the need also for regional and national policy guidance, and here just listed 3 as an example. ADB came up in December for a regional one on COVID-19 and transport in Asia and the Pacific. There is also an example from Emmanuel Ochinel. He worked with for the Nigerian government and came up also with a specific Nigerian policy product. And third one, as an example, UCL in partnership also with their country partners in Sierra Leone and Mozambique came up with their policy guidance. So the need also was more and more filled in terms of specific recommendations around recovery, around specific hygiene measures, and so on. So I think in that respect, also the call also was heard. The second was really the ask for a common data collection platform. And 2 is to mention here. One is on the right hand, the wider collection by the Oxford University, who also collects all kinds of data related to COVID, including also policies, and which is a great database. The second came up recently also with the Asian Development Bank. They're launching also their Asian Transport Outlook, where they will come up with indicators for transport and policies and also related also to COVID for the 51 member states. So another element also of data collection we've seen also here in terms of activities, which is important. The second element in terms of gaps and actions, we also called for a common platform for COVID-19 impact information. Part of that was also to encourage the collection of research. And here, the World Conference on Transport Research Society came up also with a task force and has a very extensive selection on all papers related or many papers related also to transport and COVID. But as Bernard also highlighted, the work which was done also by HVT with its 21 projects to really initiate research. So again, also I think we can also tick the box. However, we also recommended to a common assessment of current intervention, which could more guide in terms of the future actions, as well as also collection information beyond transport. So the linkers to the nexus between energy and transport, the link on food and transport, which is particularly important also for low-income countries. We see also that these 2 currently are still missing and need also far more attention also to learn also the lessons in the future, and also acknowledge that transport also is not a sector in its whole, but truly integrated with others. And the last recommendation was really about, let's also move forward to a transformative transport agenda for post-COVID world. One part of that recommendation was have a guide around future communication and events. This actually did not happen, but I think reality also almost got on top of that. How much progress we have seen in terms of events, in terms of technology, in terms of opportunities here. And I'm sure so that there are plenty of lessons which even don't need guidance, but actually just need to further testing. And I'm sure we will be able also to keep us connected throughout also in this community also in the future, even also post-COVID. The second was highlighting also leveraging more rapid and radical responses on climate and delivery. We have seen also UNFCCC stepping up with the Race to Zero, which has a transport element, and under the leadership of SlowCat with many of the partners, you can see there is a started this initiative on en route to COP21. However, we have seen in the last days, in fact, with the initial analysis of the NDC that again also that transport is still also not delivering, so it needs still also even also more attention despite also COVID. And finally also we already said last year very early, it needs also investment stimulus packages aligned with also Paris and the SDG. We have seen a lot of calls also for action. We have seen some analysis, but at the same time, we're still also lacking here so really strong messages in terms of going ahead. So moving forward, I see three elements which are crucial. One is really capturing now so the learning lessons and for post-COVID-19 world. So really also analyzing what had happened, what were the impacts of also different activities and how to also make use of them in the future. And the second, as you see also on that picture, we're just also in the beginning of the recession. We now is investing a lot of money, but that will be also not available also in 2 or 3 years any longer. And then we still have to tackle climate change for a long time. So how we also enable also this recovery in a way that we tackle really also climate change now. And third, this was actually, the paper was a call for action. I'm pleased to see also that many things followed. But we are also heading now towards COP26, and we'll see more calls for action. And I hope also the action will be aligned also to the calls for action will be aligned also with action. And that leads me also to one of the actions also, which were results of also the HVT work was in fact gTKP. And again, congratulations to Susanna and team, because I personally see also the value of gTKP as a hub for COVID-19 information, particularly so on low-income countries. It's great to see you, so, and we will learn more about that, the different types of information collection, from data to policies to all the different modes. But this is not about also like another website. I think Susanna and the team had done a very good effort reaching out to many partners, because this should accelerate us in these existing initiatives and not also like grabbing attention just also to this website, but really also enhance also the information which is already there and provided by many of the partners. And as you will hear, there's a long history also to gTKP, and it's great also to keep also that sustainable. With that, again, thanks a lot also for your attention, and congratulations again, and back to you, Susanna.
Thank you very much, Holger. Yes, lots to discuss still, and I saw also in the chat Peter O'Neill, who knows gTKP very well, has a very valid point, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that one later on. You just started up on, but I'd like to call now for Alana, Dave, and Patrick to come on the screen, and maybe to the team to allow us to to be on a full screen mode so that we can see each other. And we are entering now the second part of the webinar, where we We are going to hear actually from two people who have their feet on the ground and the actions on the ground. Peter made a comment in the chat saying that at that time when gTKP started many years ago, one of the issues that we saw was the difficulty of engaging with local communities. And I'd like for that to turn immediately to Patrick. Patrick, you work for the Global Alliance of Road Safety NGOs, a very solid, robust network of NGOs all over the world, especially in Africa. And you've been working, you're still working actually on one of these HVT funded projects that have come out of this call, and they're part of have been financed under this special fund for COVID of the HVT. Can you tell us a little bit about this study, the experience you have in reaching out to different countries, and yes, identifying what have been the difficulties, what are the knowledge gaps that you have seen? Let's start with that and then move forward. Patrick.
All right. Thank you, Susanna. I hope I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are. Okay,
great. Thank you, Susanna, and thank you for the, for this setting the stage with Holger, as well as with Obika. So yes, Patrick, I'm here because I really also love the story here and what we are actually working on. And in my first opening thing is that, of course, the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety has a very wide network in Africa. Actually, we have NGOs in 29 countries, and we have about 73 NGOs and counting. And these have people who work at the grassroots, the people who are sort of interacting with the community at daily basis, and they really understand what the community needs, what the community is responding, how the impacts of COVID, for example, measures have impacted on them. So we embarked on a joint project funded by HVT, and we together with IRF. And the idea was to review policy and practice. Now, the title of our project was basically Africa Response to COVID-19 and its impact on transport and mobility of goods and people. So we were just reviewing policy and practice to see where there is a gap or where there are connections, and making sure that we are able to highlight what is coming out, good practices coming out, the challenges, in order to inform, of course, policy using some evidence-based approach. So we had 7 countries, and this was based, of course, on our networks and where we had NGOs who can really do the work. So we did work in Cameroon, Kenya, Morocco, Mozambique, or we are still doing Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda. So what we essentially did was to look at, first of all, with the IRF expertise, looking at the literature review, desk review of what are some of these data that is available. And at the onset, of course, we had a lot of difficulty because quantitative data is very difficult to really find in the African context. And where you find it, you don't know whether it's valid, you cannot validate, you don't know who, and sometimes nobody wants to own what you find on the literature. So basically that was really had to give us, we were able to move forward and say, okay, let's talk to these people, maybe where the data is coming from, talk to key informants in these countries and get to know what is really happening. So to support lack of this data, we had to do key informant interviews. And as Susanna has said, we went further and looked at collecting now qualitative data to actually support this. And this is where the Global Alliance and the NGOs network was involved. And our work was basically to go to the communities and get their experiences with the COVID impacts and how they were responding. Maybe I can stop there, Susanna.
Sure, Patrick. I think, well, I am now wearing my hat of IRF here as well and confirm, and it's a pity that Divine cannot join us today. Divine is the director of the road transport in Cameroon, but we had invited him specifically because he has been part of this process and this study with the key informants interview. And Divine is actually sitting in the task force, interministerial task force, that is handling the issue of COVID and a response to COVID in Cameroon. He was actually one of those who was able to provide us a lot of information, but just because he was sitting in that specific position within the task force. Patrick, can you tell us, and the rest of the audience, because of course I know myself the work, but what has been the key findings when you look at it from, the people out there, the NGOs? We always say the NGOs are the eyes on the ground. What are the key findings, and what is the key reflection or conclusion that you draw up of this experience?
Thank you, Susanna. I think the first is a quick observation before I just maybe highlight what is coming out from the, as we analyze the data, is there seems to be quite a big disconnect between the policies which brought about the measures and how they are being implemented, and also how the communities are responding to these measures. So the qualitative research that we have done is quite interesting, because you get to hear what people are saying and how they are responding, how it has impacted on them. So the first thing is that actually the mechanisms for implementing the policies or the measures are not actually being felt. So we have the higher level, or what we may call the ivory tower policymakers, and they're saying this has to be done. And of course, it is based on the global sort of response. But the infrastructure, say, for actually implementing these particular measures and the enablers for the common person in the common transport user are not there. So you find that now what we are looking at, which is interesting from the findings, is that there are people in the communities have adopted different mechanisms of adapting to the new normal. And this is what we are now working on, to make sure that we create that evidence. What are the good or favorable practices coming out from the community that can help inform the policymakers? And that's why, maybe to just add, that the gTKP is a very good platform. We see that if it focuses especially on the low and medium income countries, we are able to get a very sort of validated information that can help the policymakers, because the policy made from the top doesn't kind of resonate with the community, becomes quite a big issue in trying to have the recovery from COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I think we're due with this report in April, so stay tuned. The webinar will come up on that. Let me turn now to Alana. Alana, you are Urban Transport Director at the International Transport Workers Federation. Over the past year, we have been hearing a lot talking about the nurses and the doctors, and rightly so, the effort that they were doing. I think less attention has been given to the valuable and fundamental contribution that the workers in our sector, in the transport sector, are giving during the crisis, making sure that doctors can get and nurses to the hospitals, and that delivery of food and medicines can still go on. Can you tell us what has been your experience as the Transport Workers Federation? What have been the difficulties? How have you been responding to them?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Susanna, for inviting me to be on the panel. I'm part actually of a steering committee together with the IRF for sustainable mobility for all as well. And that has a global roadmap of action towards sustainable transport. And I wanted to start with that mainly because that is a very kind of comprehensive pathway to sustainable transport, covering efficiency, safety, universal access, and green mobility, with cross-cutting issues related to gender. But that was a roadmap that was developed before the pandemic. So now there's a big attempt to adapt the roadmap, taking into account some of the impacts that COVID has had on the sector as well as economies. The roadmap's been revised, and policy measures are being introduced to address issues of resilience. And I think one of the previous speakers mentioned, I think that's a real reflection of the sense of urgency that we all have, that a more transformative approach to transport is necessary. So I wanted to start with that because I think transformative means that we need access to knowledge resources like never before on COVID impacts in different sectors. And I obviously will speak about the workforce now and what that means for the different stakeholders. But I also think from our perspective as an international trade union organization, the impacts are important, but probably even more important at this stage is the issue of recovery. Because I think that's the real opportunity that we have as different stakeholders in the sector to contribute to a major transformation. So I really just wanted to congratulate the IRF on enhancing the knowledge portal. And I think particularly for including a section on transport workers and giving their experiences, validity and visibility. I think it's really important to look at what impact COVID has had on the workforce. But again, in relation to recovery, recognizing the knowledge and skills that workers themselves have to contribute towards what the future of transport looks like. Susanna, what I also wanted to emphasize is that transport is a huge employer globally. In some cities, it's the biggest employer. So what is happening with the workforce really needs to be kind of addressed. And when it comes to COVID, our experience has been what we've heard from our affiliates, that the impacts on transport workers have been absolutely huge. And in particular, COVID has impacted very harshly on the most vulnerable in the workforce. We've heard a number of case studies here on low-income countries. And in those countries, often 85% of the workforce is informal. They have no access to income and social protection, and they were almost faced with this impossible choice of working and risking their health or losing their incomes. So I think that's been really important to recognize that kind of impact. So it's so valuable for us to have access to these resources as a stakeholder. I think for all of us, it's really important that the stories and experiences of workers are documented. And Susanna, you yourself said, in this pandemic, they've been recognized as key workers who kept cities moving at a real time of crisis. One thing that I just wanted to highlight, there are a number of university studies that are being done at the moment about the impact of COVID on transport workers in big cities like New York and London. And we're very much hoping that these studies will provide us with the evidence base for long-term changes in health and safety and working conditions in the transport sector. And something that we should really consider is how some of these studies could be extended to low-income countries. So I think, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Alana. I'm just quickly looking and checking the clock as we need to move forward. I have to say that together with ILO, of course, the Transport Workers Federation is the reference, and in preparing this section, we have largely cross-referenced your work because you have been doing an outstanding work. We need to have organizations and people like you who really spell out the problems, what are the issues and how to solve them. And I hope that's the purpose of this exercise with gTKP, that by making this knowledge available and accessible to everybody, we all together manage to move some steps forward. I have to thank you and Patrick and move to the next session, because now we have 13 minutes left, and I'd like to give everyone, thank you very much, Alana. I'll ask Meline, the assistant, for pulling up the slides, just to give you a little bit of background now exactly on the gTKP. Meline, can you pull up the slides, please? There you are. And if you can put me exactly. Let me say a few words about the gTKP, because some of you might not be familiar, of course, with it and hearing it for the first time. The Global Transport Knowledge Partnership is a project that was initiated many years ago and funded by, at that time it was called DFID, today it's called the FCDO, so the UK Government's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And it was supported by FCDO, DFID until 2011. gTKP is managed by the International Road Federation that I represent since 2009. Why us? For a number of different reasons, one very important being our extended network in many of the low middle income countries, and the fact that knowledge sharing and dissemination is one of the key strategic pillars of activities of IRF, together with the networking, the bringing the people, the organization, the different stakeholders together, and also the policy and advocacy work that we do at different levels, at the international level, by engaging in the initiatives like the Sustainable Mobility for All. And thanks, Alana, for making that link extremely important link and connection, or by working within the United Nations Road Safety Collaboration Group when it comes to road safety. gTKP, a little bit like HVT, has been funding, or was funding at that time, research as well, beside dissemination, knowledge dissemination activities around 8 key transport areas: rural, urban, climate, social, trade, finance, safety, and governance. And again, the focus has always been low and middle income countries, and gTKP was actually the portal that we were using as a hub to host a lot of the knowledge that was being funded and produced, but also other knowledge that we, the theme champions were called, for each of these things were collecting. Since 2007, so from 2011, when the funding started, IRF has continued to keep gTKP alive with our own means for what we could. And in 2017, the portal has also started to host some of the knowledge items that are produced within the United Nations Road Safety Collaboration Group. Next slide, please. The reason was, in fact, that we realized, as often happens in some of the international group of experts, that a lot of the expertise and the knowledge that was produced within those groups was actually remaining confined within these groups. And so we offered the opportunity to use a gTKP platform to making sure that this expertise and knowledge could reach out a lot more stakeholders, and especially those who really need it. Then COVID came, and as Bernard and Holger were mentioning, a number it was clear that there was a gap that needed to be addressed in terms of knowledge and knowledge dissemination. And so hence we submitted a proposal that was successful to reshape, reorganize, and create gTKP, but also create a specific section within the gTKP to host COVID-19 knowledge specifically for the transport sector, always through this lens of low and middle income countries. Next slide, please. And I'm checking the time. The ambition, and I like that person standing up there in the ladder, the ambition that we all have, because this is really a common joint effort, is to fast track the access for low and middle income countries to knowledge that experience, the learning resources, the good practices that also Alana and Patrick were referring, both when it comes to COVID-19 response, the impacts, and now, as Alana was mentioning, it's the time to really focus on what's next on the recovery. The other key important point is the idea of working in partnership with other initiatives and organization, and hopefully see in the longer term gTKP grow in the future and become almost a fully-fledged capacity building hub. That's in the longer run. Peter O'Neill in the chat was mentioning that. I think it's really fundamental, and I'm sure many of the people attending today will agree with me, and certainly the speakers, that there's only one way that we can move forward, and that is by collaborating and coordinating. Hence, the idea as well to relaunch the gTKP, because it's by working together, even sometimes on simple tasks like filtering and organizing knowledge items, that we start learning from each other, understanding each other, and coordinate work a little bit better. Next slide, please. And the journey is on. I don't consider this, and I want to repeat it here loud and clear. Yes, this is the the first step that we have accomplished, but of a much longer journey. And it's an extremely important journey that we want to go through with you, with all of you, the stakeholders out there, with other organizations. It's not only we need to make sure that we quickly, fast and effectively give access to knowledge, to the existing resources, because there's a lot of knowledge that has been produced throughout the past year, but that we also do that by connecting it to other big research and other tools that exist already, and so make sure, as Holger and also Lana were mentioning, that we equipped especially low and middle income countries with that knowledge, that expertise, and the tool to really work on a transformative transport agenda. Next slide, please. And I like very much this slide as well, because again, the sky is the limit. The ambition long term is that gTKP is used to not only to shape the response in the short term to COVID, but support really those efforts for a transformative transport agenda post-COVID. Next one, please. And I want to reiterate again the need and the willingness from all of us to do this in partnership. So before I get quickly now to show you and give you a quick guided tour through the gTKP, to let you know as well that this is just the first step. We have made an effort to screen, organize, and collect all this information, and we've done so by collaborating with many different organizations. What is extremely important for us, and we have committed to do, is to make sure that we organize webinars, opportunities where in the span of 60 minutes, we really have the opportunity to exchange expertise and discuss and deep dive as well in some key issues, which are also backed up by research that's been currently funded by the HVT. Sorry. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take the opportunity to announce already that we have already scheduled the first of a series of what we call the thematic webinars of gTKP. It will be focusing on making transport resilient to pandemics. We are organizing this in collaboration with TRL, a transport research laboratory in the UK, which just delivered a set of very useful guidelines that will give you a chance to discover during the next webinar on the 25th of March. Registration is open on the IRF website. Next, I think that's the final one. And now it's the time to give you a quick round and tour to the gTKP. There you are. I hope you can see my screen well. Lots to say, but time is very limited now. And of course, we have tried to give a new look and feel to the old gTKP. But what I want to say and stress here, we are not doing this work, and the aim is not to have this work look cool and nice. It has to be functional. That was the primary objective that we set to ourselves when we were doing this. Before I start getting into the details, and I promise you I'll keep this to 5 minutes because I know many of you have to go, I want to pause here and take 1 minute of time to thank all the teams that have been working and are behind this, because it may seem very easy and simple when you see it now done on the screen. It has taken over the past 3 months, because that was the span that was given to us to work. A lot of work has been going on. Let me thank the IRF team, all of them, Julia, Meline, Chris, Mylis, whose birthday is today, Sarah, Pierre, Jean-René, Hero, and I hope I have not forgotten anyone. The SlowCat team, without whom this work would have not been possible. We are part, as IRF, of the SlowCat partnership, and we have been using that privileged connection that we have with the SlowCat also to make sure that we reached out to a number of other organizations who have been reviewing a lot of the resources that you find in here. So thanks again also to all the reviewers. And last but not least, I have to thank Adrian Walsh and Mark Schotten as well for the support that they have given in reviewing the road safety part of the website. Now, let me quickly show you what we have done. The menu up here, extremely simple to allow to see who we are and what the gTKP is about. We have created this new section about webinars. And for the moment, you see some of them. So making sure that we filter quickly every month what's going on. So feel free to send us your next webinars, and we'll make sure that we'll display them here. The focus for us in priority, it's always the lens of low and middle income countries, of course. Contact to reach out to us. I think I want to show you this. This is not just a piece of work for IRF. As I mentioned, we are looking forward to work with many of you. If you have knowledge, if you have comments as well on what you see, help us enhance this platform, both with knowledge or with comments on anything that you feel might be useful. The login is there for the administrators for us, and we have made sure in different parts of the website to always give to the user an immediate quick access to the search engine. There's a knowledge library with plenty of resources behind the gTKP, and as you can see from the screen, let me move this, you can search by keywords, by the different theme in which the gTKP is organized, by author, by type of knowledge. That's also important to filter and make sure to have a more precise search, region as well. If I go now to the important part that I need to show you. When you land on the gTKP on the home page, you will always probably take a look at this one. This tells you immediately in a snapshot what are the latest additions to the library, so that you don't have to search through the entire search engine, but you will see immediately what's new out there. Then we have created specific entry points for the 4 bigger part of the gTKP now: the COVID-19 Knowledge Hub, the high volume transport, the recap work, and on the right-hand side, what you see here is the UNRSC resources. But let me show you from here. We have created this new menu that unfolds in different layers. As I was mentioning, one key section on COVID-19, one on the high volume transport, road safety, it's a fundamental pillar of our work as well, rural roads, and the gTKP archives. The gTKP archives, let me start from here, it's the old version, or if you want, the old repository of the gTKP. Those resources have not been updated, but we felt there's a lot of value in there. And so we decided to leave it open and accessible to all the users. Let me focus in the few minutes left, and we're already over time, on the COVID, specifically the COVID-19 part, which is also one of the main reasons why here today. How are we organized and structured that piece of work? A section on impacts, a section on responses, and when you use the arrow underneath the responses, we have organized a number of sub-pages. And basically, if you look at it, they are all displayed in alphabetical order. But if you look at it, it's an entry point to the knowledge by type of transport, aviation, rail, maritime, etc., road, whether it's informal or public transport, passenger transport or freight, and rural versus urban. And of course, we have made sure as well to give sufficient space to the walking and the cycling section. And probably I can click on this one to show you the structure that we have built in for each of those sub pages. You will always have some text that shapes and outlines the issues, and you will see at the bottom these 4 or sometimes 5 predefined sections are predefined in the system, collection of key documents. These documents you find also in the search engine, and recommended links. It's links to specific parts of the website, for example, of certain organizations which are particularly relevant to this topic, presentations and webinars, so anything that can help you really understand the issues. And the partners, it's really to flag you out all those organizations who are doing fantastic and very useful work on all this. Let me go back for some of those, like aviation as well. There has been, we have been able for some of those to also structure a little bit some of the text, all in the same way with a big background, operational responses, policy responses, a bit of analysis, and again, all the resources. Let me close this one and then show you as well that we have built also, if you want some horizontal issues like COVID-19 and transport data, Holger was referring to it. Some of the graphs that you see here are those that we are building in the report that we're currently preparing, and making sure that you would have here a gateway to plenty of other repository. Alana was mentioning it, extremely important as well, COVID-19 and transport workers. It's a very extensive section with plenty of documents. So I invite you to look at that. And we could not, of course, do without paying attention to women, children, elderly people, and with these people with disabilities. We also have, of course, a part on, let me close this, on recovery. I think, as Alana and others were saying, that's where we really need to focus now going forward. So we have started to screen and outline some of key issues, and we look forward to work with many of you going forward to further develop this part. That's about it for the COVID part. We have already created as well specific entry for the high volume transport program, which has its own website. So we just wanted to make sure that people know about the high volume transport program and that they have direct access to their knowledge center as well. On the road safety, this is basically the UNRSC work updated. As many of you know, we have a new decade of action that has already started and officially will be launched probably in May. We have updated this part, but this section will be further developed over the next months as soon as the new plan for the decade of action is finalized. We are jointly working on that. Plenty of resources. Time is very limited right now. I really encourage you to take a look at it. Rural roads, fundamental here. One point that I want to flag out is many of you will know that the RECAP program, also funded by UK Aid, is now concluded. IRF has taken over the management of the knowledge library, but we have also decided in the transition to keep alive also the RECAP website for the moment. So there's a wealth of host of resources available on the RECAP side website, and specifically also on the Rural Access Library. Make sure you reach out to those, and access to previous transport research program funded by UK Aid as well. It's all in here. I think we have run out of time. I'll stop here. Let me stop sharing the screen. We did have a couple of questions. I think we have already responded to the one from Peter. I think the difference from the past is that there's a lot more collaboration already going on through specific initiatives like Sustainable Mobility for All and also SlowCut, and we have already witnessed the willingness of many to join hands and to collaborate. I think we are running out of time, so I would suggest that those of you, and apologize for those who have put forward some questions and we have not answered them, that we will get back to you bilaterally or openly to everybody. The last point here is to tell you that these webinar recordings as well as the presentations will be made available both on the IRF website under the page, specific event page, but they will be made available, of course, also on the gTKP. I'd like all the speakers to open up the screens and join me in thanking all the participants for attending the webinar. I see some are asking about the languages. Yes, gTKP can host resources in any language that you want. You will find in there some in Russian already, French, English. I think we have something on Spanish. So feel free. This is a common house, and we want going forward to develop it as a common house. I give you already an appointment to the 25th of March. Till then, you will have time to go through the experience and the gTKP a little bit more, and we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more as well on what are the gaps that still needs to be addressed and how can we collectively address those gaps. My thanks to the speakers, Bernard, Holger, Alana, and Patrick, for making the time for this, and also for your contribution, and to the teams as well, all the teams that have been involved. Thank you, and have a great afternoon. This is the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Susanna.
Bye-bye.